Howdy of you delicious people. I'm here today to play Misty for you. I'm here today to review a movie called Play Misty for Me. I had just decided that reasonably there's some times where I'm just gonna, or probably more often than not, just watch a movie that I've kind of wanted to see, and this lands into one of those where it's kind of been like a movie that I'm like, I just want to see this movie. I know there might be not a thing behind it, but like you know what, I'm gonna have fun with this. Because really, this movie just kind of goes off the chain, freaking when you have Evelyn who is just going after Clint Eastwood's character called Dave. Like it's funny, like Clint Eastwood is such like a scary guy for most of his movies, and to just see Evelyn just like freaking like topping like Clint Eastwood is just an interesting feat for me to watch. So with this movie, to kind of tee it up for people, what is Play Misty about? Well, we have coincidentally one, this being the very first movie that Clint Eastwood has ever directed. So that's kind of really cool to have that little thing under the cap of like watching the very first movie that Clint Eastwood had directed. But, anyways, like, I thought that this movie was interesting, and I thought that having Clint Eastwood being a DJ in this movie was kind of an interesting thing for him to play. Him kind of being a radio guy that is to basically recite poems and then kind of do these kinds of music slash songs, whatever, that I guess have to supposedly not have any actual lyrics to them. It's all just instrumental stuff. So we have Evelyn who is to consistently call Dave and mentions like, "Hey, play Misty for me." And so Dave does do so every time this person is to call, because basically he is to have anybody call and they give a song choice, and then so Dave does it. Like, he doesn't do it in a very much like Casey Kasem kind of way where he's like, and he writes, "Dear Evelyn, leave me the F alone." Signed, Dave. XOXO. No, because Dave, like, it's interesting because eventually this girl gets so obsessed about Dave, like to extreme measures, to the point where like Dave is grabbing this woman and at some point shoving her into a taxi, and you could just tell like Dave is at this like boiling point of just like, good god. But this movie just keeps on going and keeps on like keeping you on like, god dang woman, like you're just like, there's at one point when there's this like really loud scream that comes when Evelyn is to be in a bed. So like more than like there, if you're seeing Evelyn in a bed at some point in time, probably might want to tune the volume just a little bit down a little bit. Or otherwise you're gonna get an earful of I'm like, oh man, so that freaking hurt my ears. So but going into here, yeah, it's just one of those like obsession kind of stories. Like I've seen, there was like an Idris Elba movie where there was one girl who was just, like, I've kind of seen these kinds of movies. Like I just stumble upon them because I'm like, oh, what is this movie about? But like, I think the Idris Elba movie I think was called Obsessed or Obsession or something. And so like obviously that tells you exactly what that movie was about. I think that also had like Beyonce in it or something like that. I could be wrong. The Idris Elba movie, I mean. But yeah, like I think when I was like asking like my mom about it just to see if she like saw it, she was like, Oh yeah, like this kind of reminds me of a thing called uh oh my god, what was it? It was a Glenn Close Jeff Bridges movie, something Edge. Well, you can go and probably IMDb up. I think it's like Jagged Edge. I think is what she said. Um, I could be wrong about that, but it's a Glenn Close movie and a Jeff Bridges movie, so you can probably easily Google that. I hope. But anyways, like kind of like those like Fatal Attractions, Basic Instincts kind of movies where eventually one person is to spend one night with somebody, and all of a sudden they just like, well, you love me. I know you love me. And Clint Eastwood is like, wait a minute. Whoa. Like, I did not drop the L word. Like, I thought that this girl was nice, but not that nice. To where eventually Clint Eastwood's character, Dave, is to be thrusted into the arms of another woman. And it seems like that woman seems like the love of eventually Dave's life. But with that said, I think I kind of teed it up enough for this movie to go into spoilers about this film. There might not be like a heavy amount of details. It might just be the greatest hits of this movie. But when also just kind of going into it, I'll like try to go into it as well as the movie would do. But anyways, yeah, let's go into the spoilers of this movie. I had fun watching this movie just because like this was just kind of an interesting film. There were like parts in this movie that I thought like there were some interesting cuts being done or some interesting camera angles. I guess like Clint, well, not actually like in camera in some spots, like was just kind of like picking and choosing like what he could use. And so yeah, like it was an interesting movie to see kind of what Mr. Eastwood's style was going to be. So, anyways, I think it's about time to say it is spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time again. Whoa. To spoil this movie. It is a film. So, anyways, so uh so in the very beginning of this, we have Dave, who is to make his way into this disc jockey booth, and so it seems that this guy is to be consistently having this girl who is to consistently give this request of play Misty for me. Do it. You better do it. Yeah. Like it kind of feels like she bizarrely becomes like demanding with it. Like you better like what do you think I'm gonna ask for when I'm gonna call here? Play Misty for me. Like, and I would have been like, you know what? Like Misty is out. Misty is now dead. Misty, like we destroyed that copy and like we can't get it back. Just to see what she'd say. Just see what would happen. Would she mail a copy of the Misty song for him to play? That would have been interesting. To see like what would happen if like he was just like, you know, I'm tired of that song and play Misty for me. No. What if he would have said no? Anyways, so the other disc jockey is to say to David, like, well, hey, it looks like you have your repeater, your person that consistently calls for that Misty song. And Dave is like, yeah. So Dave is to recite some poem in the very beginning of his like theme song, and then just kind of go about his time and doing his music. So this leads to eventually having Dave, who is to go to a bar, and so Evelyn is to find him and talk to him. And so Dave starts talking with Evelyn, and it seems like they're kind of hitting things off. And so Dave just kind of like spends the night with this girl, but there is no like, I don't think any hanky panky or anything like that. Like it was just like they're, I think, being cordial, or maybe he did have like recently just a one night stand with this girl, whatever. Like there isn't much to have like actually gotten from that. But anyways, so Dave is to like eventually have Evelyn all of a sudden like come to his house and to like drop groceries by, and Dave is like, you just like came on into my place. And Evelyn is just like, well, yeah, like I wanted to stock you up on some foods here and there. And like Dave was like, well, what if I was just like, what if I had company over? Like, what if I had another woman over? Like, if anything, like, we obviously, like, with Dave saying, what if I had another woman over? That basically means that this relationship isn't cemented in stone. And so Dave is like, what if I had somebody else here? And Evelyn is like, well, that would have been fine. Like, I could have given you your groceries and left. So but Evelyn just won't let things go. So, excuse me. So what ends up happening is so Evelyn is to eventually go and drop the L word on Clint because it seems that they are spending some time together, and it seems that Dave is kind of going to be interested in another girl named Toby. So Dave starts spending time with Evelyn, but eventually he's going and transitioning to Toby, and Evelyn is to eventually find out. And so then Evelyn asks Dave about this, like, hey, like, I saw you with another girl, like, hey, like you didn't like sleep with her, did you yet? Did you? Dave is like, so what if I did? So what if I didn't? Like, if anything, like we're like you and me like don't have a cemented relationship. And Evelyn's like, but I love you. And Dave is like, well, I don't feel the same. So Evelyn is to eventually just be so like distraught about all this that she's like ranting and wailing and whatever, to where Dave is just like, you know what? I think I just want to drive you home. Like, I think I just like, I just think I want you out of my house. Goodbye. See you later. Like, if anything, like, I guess Dave just didn't want the drama. And eventually, this lady is going to bring the ultimate drama if you've ever heard it in your life. So, Dave is to just like drive off from his own place because he's just like, I don't want anything to do with this woman right now. I am just so freaking done. And so Dave is to eventually get a call, and it's Evelyn, and Evelyn's like, did you seriously like walk away from us, kind of thing? And Dave is just like, yeah, like, so I did. So what? Like, we're not a real, like, cemented relationship. So it gets to the point where Evelyn is to go and take a knife to her wrist. And so Dave is to now, like, go and run to, like, try to take care of Evelyn. And the police are to be called, or no, wait, the doctors are to be called. And so the doctor is to mention, like, well, like, I should probably report this. And Dave is like, well, I really hope that you didn't. And so the doctor's like, well, okay, like, so and so this doctor is to give Evelyn drugs to kind of knock her out. And Dave was just like, man, like, if anything, I would love to be able to take like Toby out for another for a date, and I'm hoping that Evelyn just doesn't wake up. and eventually like come and like ruin my date or any number of things. So what ends up happening is that Dave goes and takes out Toby and then comes back to wake up Evelyn, who is sleeping from all of her drugs. And so all of a sudden, Evelyn freaking wakes up screaming like her head off. And she's to mention, oh my god, I had a dream that I was like drowning in an ocean or something. And Dave, you were there. And so Dave is like, well, like, it was all a nightmare. It was all a dream. Like, and so, but Evelyn is still like thinking that her and Dave are going to be an item. Like, Dave is just doing this to be nice at this point, but he's really just like, get the out of here. Like, I'm tired of your nonsense. I'm tired of you. Like this is exhausting. And so, but Dave is just trying to be nice. So what ends up with Dave just trying to be nice eventually ends up having Dave eventually starting to not be so nice. Because all of a sudden, like every single time that Dave is to be with some woman or to have some woman somewhere, Evelyn is to freak out. To the point of every single woman that Dave is to be with, Evelyn is one stalking him, but on top of that, she is to basically interfere with whatever Dave is doing and basically calling whoever this woman is like, oh, is this the girl that you were cheating with? This hussy or this whoever? And then like Evelyn creates this gigantic scene and really like Evelyn has no clue who this person actually is or whatever. So it just becomes like Dave is just like, I am freaking sick of this woman. I am sick of this woman. Because what ends up happening is that Dave is to eventually go and do a business meeting with this much older woman. And so Evelyn goes and interrupts this meeting between these two people. And all of a sudden Evelyn is like, who is this older broad? Like, are you taking a pity party from the old folks' home? Are you sleeping with this woman, Dave? Are you messing around with this woman? And Dave is like, no, like, this is a business. Like, this is a business meeting. And Evelyn's like, oh, right, no, Dave. Like, I'm sure you're sleeping around with her. And so Dave just freaking grabs this woman and just drags her into a taxi cab. And so the taxi cab is saying, where to? And Dave is just like, move. Freaking go anywhere. And so what ends up happening is that Evelyn just goes to Dave's place because evidently she has a key. So she can sneak in whenever she freaking wants to. And so Evelyn just goes and completely rips and tears through Dave's entire house. Just like basically takes a knife to this whole entire house. And so all of a sudden, Dave is to have a like a woman that comes through his house to clean things, which is, I guess, this woman's name is Birdie, which is like, she's a sweet woman, like she's a nice woman. And so Birdie comes on in and is to just look at the carnage that Evelyn is had here. And Birdie is just like, oh my god. Like, and so all of a sudden Birdie continues to go through this home, maybe thinking that it's just Dave who just destroyed his own home or had a party or something. But then eventually we have Birdie being greeted by Evelyn with a knife. And so Evelyn is just continuing to stab and slice up Birdie, sadly enough, and but also just like carnage is at this woman's wake. So what ends up happening is that Birdie sadly gets freaking carted away uh, with the paramedics to get the heck out of here, and so now like Dave is having to fill out uh, a report, I think, with this detective named Murphy, I think. So I don't know the actual. I'm hoping it's Murphy. So bizarrely, this detective is to mention something about like he has to give certain information at the store. What does a store mean? Did they used to call like detective headquarters stores before? That seemed odd to me. It seemed like an odd line delivery. But this detective is asking about Evelyn because Birdie had witnessed this woman named Evelyn. And so now Dave is being asked about Evelyn. Like, there was one time where I think when Evelyn was to have, like, cut her wrists, we eventually had, like, Dave, who had been like heavily drinking and just sleeping on the couch, just kind of like God, he's just so exhausted dealing with Evelyn. So, and I think Birdie appears and tries to like clean up after Dave at some point, but then eventually we see Birdie here being carted away. So Dave is to mention that he barely knows this woman and that him and her are basically strangers. If anything, like he mentions that she was just a fan of the radio station and like he just brought her home one night. And all of a sudden now, like it seems like this woman is to become more and more crazed in that maybe she needs to seek the help of a therapist or some kind of mental stability place known as a mental hospital. And so, what ends up happening is that they end up carting this woman off, carting her away to eventually be sent to supposedly this mental hospital. And what ends up happening uh, is that eventually we have Dave, who is to eventually be working one night, and all of a sudden we have Evelyn who's to call in like, hey, play Misty for me. And Dave is just like, oh my God, this woman again? Like, I thought she was in a hospital, gone forever. I guess not. Like, during this time, we had, like, Dave, who was even cementing his relationship even more with Toby, like, going and, like, skinny dipping in this one pond, and, like, it seemed like cementing this relationship more and more and more to seem like this is going to be Dave's love of his life. And so, Evelyn is to, like, ask to play Misty for me. Do it for me. And so Dave is just like, okay, so are you at the hospital? Like, is there a radio nearby you? And Evelyn is like, no, there's not a radio nearby me, but I'll know you'll do it. Because Evelyn is to mention uh, that she had been released from the hospital and that she is going to now like transfer to a job in Hawaii, and that Dave will never see her again. And Dave is like, oh well, that's great that you're moving on. Thank God. Anyways, Evelyn. Well, like I guess this is goodbye then, forever, or maybe it's not. So, Because it won't be, because this movie still has to keep on chugging along. So, what ends up happening is that Dave is to just go on and have this thing called a little bit of a sleep, you know? Just resting your head on a pillow, just thinking that you're like, oh man, nothing is going to go horribly awry while I'm sleeping, huh? Well, Dave is just resting his head on his pillow. He's like, this is great. And so all of a sudden, Dave is just start to hear a little bit of a clatter, and it's definitely not Santa Claus coming down the chimney. So Dave just all of a sudden, just coincidentally, just wakes up at the perfect time, where all of a sudden Evelyn, with this huge, gigantic knife, is like, ah! And she's like stabbing Dave's pillow, and like Dave just dodges this in the perfect time. But then all of a sudden Dave gets freaking out of his bed. Like, I was assuming or assessing that this was some dream, but no, this legitimately happened. And so Dave is now looking throughout his house for Evelyn, just like, where is this crazy woman with this knife? And so Dave is to eventually call up this detective and just be like, hey, Evelyn strikes again. And so we find out that Evelyn, I guess, had snuck out of the spot that she was in. I guess the place she broke out of it. And so also it seems like this detective, after all, had listened to Dave's radio station, like, hey, you didn't play the song that I recommended. And Dave was like, oh, so you did listen. Like, I was thinking that you didn't listen, but hey, like, thank you. Like, I appreciate you listening. Kind of like anybody I would say I appreciate for anybody watching any of these things, because some of them are good, some of them are okay, and then some are just like, why did he review this? And I'm just like, because I had fun. Or I just stumbled upon a movie, and that always happens, because it happens to everybody. But anyways, so pushing on. So this detective is just like, well, hopefully, like, at this point, we just catch this woman before she ends up killing you, Dave. And Clint Eastwood is just like, well, maybe I should just get a freaking a massive gun like Dirty Harry and just say, like, well, did I fire like 4 shots or did I fire 709? Do you feel lucky? Do you feel lucky, Punk? That was a joke. So, I think it was like a Smith & Wesson gun. Is that true? I don't remember. I don't remember Dirty Harry. I could have probably just pulled it up right now. I'm like, yeah, it was Smith & Wesson, whatever. I don't know what it was. Like, it was a big fat gun. But anyways, so somebody will probably correct me, and that's fine, because somebody just has that time. So, and I don't. So, Dave is just kind of feeling like, God, am I just going to get murdered in my sleep at this point? That would be just great. Because Evelyn has been, like, quite a hassle in my journeys of being, like, terrified about an obsessed fan. Like, this is Misery all over again, except for, like, the guy was, like, strapped into the bed. Like, this is, like, all kinds of, like, the crazy loony people that eventually, like, go after, because they're fans of things, and they're just so obsessed, and, there's sometimes that, like, people will repetitiously, every single day, like, mention, like, hey, you need to upload this one video. Like, I had a person one time, that every single day just mentioned that, like, hey, uploaded another one of these videos. And I'm like, I had just uploaded one. And they're like, and then they said nothing. But then if I didn't upload one the next same thing, and it would just get to this pattern of me just going like, you know what? Like, I love the comment. Like, that's great. Like, that's going to really help out the channel. But, like, it got to the point where, like, the comments were just coming from, like, any video. And, like, it was also just starting to just get really freaking annoying. It's like it's great to have people that like want things and also are consistent commenters. That's always great. But like if it's like the same comment and it's every day, it's just like goodbye. Sadly enough, it's gonna be goodbye. So, but people are nice, thank God. Now that I shifted over here, for the most part, people are nice. Every once in a while, they're just like, I don't know what this comment means, but anyways. So, but also, like every single comment helps out the video, whether it's like after X amount of whatever time or whatever that anyone else said. Oh, only comments will help if it's like 2 hours after you post. Who cares? Everything helps out the video. It doesn't matter when anything is put into whatever. And I know there's some YouTube specialists out there. It doesn't like whatever. Let's finish up this review so I can call it a day for this one. So because I kind of really like rushed through, but like there's also a lot of downtime in this movie. Like there's a whole bizarre Dave is to eventually go off to this like music festival, and like there's this whole like instrumental part that eventually I just honestly just skipped through because I'm just like I like this movie is slow enough. Now you have this like musical festival that Clint Eastwood is going through, and I'm like, I just don't have the time or patience for that. So I just kind of honestly just skipped through it. But anyways, so the very last thing that is to happen is that Evelyn is to find and have tea with Toby, while uh, while Dave is to be at his work, at his job. And like his job is almost to be at the end of his shift. So Dave is to call Toby, or Toby is to call on the radio station and just kind of mentioning like, hey, how's your day and so on and so forth. And so Toby's like, hey, how about you how about you do a song like that's just meant for us, that's just like a romantic song. And so I think at the tail end of Dave's conversation with Toby, he is to eventually go and I think hear Evelyn at the end of that call. And so I think there was also this moment where the detective had come to Dave because when Evelyn had called him and mentioned that she was going to Hawaii, she had bizarrely mentioned this quote that sounded like a song to me. Uh, like God, what was it? What was it? I don't know what I don't even know what it like. Clint Eastwood didn't even know what it was. Like, and then eventually he remembered what it was because he went into some book and it was this thing called Evelyn, and so there was this like little like lyric or whatever about like something about love one another. Like it sounded like one of these old songs where it's like, and we rely on each other, uh-huh. Like it sounded like that bizarre like limerick or whatever, but like because when I was hearing what she was saying, I'm like, isn't that a lyric to some song? Like I don't know, but anyway, so I push on. So Dave, after his shift is to be over, Dave is to make his way to Toby's place. And so Evelyn is to eventually go and uh, excuse me, I apologize. I'm like, man, I'm having like this, like, I don't know what it is, like, kind of just throat, just, like, seizing today, via this video, of course. So this will be interesting to see what happens for one other video I'm going to do today. So, Dave is to eventually go into this place, and one, Evelyn is to have sliced up this portrait of Dave that Evelyn was to say to Toby. It's like, well, I don't think you got the eyes quite right. If anything, like, Dave's eyes is a little bit like bluer, darker, menacinger, or whichever. And Toby's like, oh, so you know Dave. And Evelyn is like, yeah, I know him. So Evelyn is to go and start chopping off Toby's hair, just saying like, yeah, I need you to look good for Dave, so I'm gonna start chopping off your hair. Like, she duct tapes her mouth and just is like starting to chop off her hair, just like willy nilly. It's hair, so at least like it's not like she's killing her, so that's fine. So Dave makes his way to Toby's, and so now we have this moment where, like, Evelyn is just, like, slicing and dicing through frickin' Clint Eastwood, and it's sad. Like, we have a moment where, like, Clint Eastwood's leg ends up getting cut, and so he's, like, hobbling through the place, just kind of looking where Evelyn is. Both Dave and Evelyn are fighting it out and wrestling with these scissors, and like Dave just continues to get sliced. It gets to the point where he's like grabbing the knife or grabbing the scissors, like trying to like hold Evelyn from stabbing him yet again, but that just cuts his hand because obvious, like when you hold scissors that way, eventually like this girl is gonna like try to like cut the Dave's hand. So eventually what just ends up is that Dave decides, you know what, I'm going to like chuck this girl frickin' like off of this home, to where what ends up happening is Evelyn is to go and fall, like, because there's a pretty steep like decline into this water, and like it's kind of like on a cliffside. So so Evelyn gets pushed out of this home to fall down this like cliff edge like thing into the water, to, I guess, disappear and to be dead forever, supposedly. And so now the police come and they are like filling all of these reports again, and like, but supposedly they just assumed that all this is to be resolved. Both Dave and Toby, I guess, are going to be like lovers forever and ever, because they're like, after that, like, we're like, Dave came to the rescue of Toby, so I guess like they might just be soulmates and lovers forever. And plus, also, who knows when Evelyn is gonna be coming a striking back? There was ever gonna be a sequel to this, which there wouldn't be. But yeah, so while Evelyn is to die, like there is a old recording, I guess, of Dave, because maybe Dave went on vacation or whatever. So, like, Dave had an old recording about him going and playing Misty for Evelyn before, and so all of a sudden, like, they play out with this Misty song, and that's the way that this movie just like ends, really. So with that said, I think I'm just gonna get out of here. Like, eventually this movie got really, like, the escalation of Evelyn just made this movie just so interesting. I really just enjoy this movie. Like, I don't care what time period certain things are. Some movies you just enjoy for how they deliver things, or really just how, like, every once in a while it's kind of interesting to see, like, a person that gets obsessed over another person, and just see them just kind of like, but I love you! And it's like, but we hardly met. It's so like it just gets to the point of like this person just like I've seen obsession movies where like if like this person isn't going to work out in this relationship, this person goes out of their way to ruin this other person's life and like almost like kills every one of their family members, like freaking like uh any like friend that is a girl of this person or guy of this person, especially if genders are reversed or whichever, like brutally murdered. Just like man, like a whole like there are some very interesting like obsession kind of movies out there, and like not that you can enjoy that kind of way of like whatever, but like every once in a while like I'll watch these kind of obsession movies where like swim fan's a perfect example where you have a girl that is with a guy that is to like have this girl just tell this guy like just tell me that you love me, and then the guy says okay like I love you, and then he doesn't actually mean it, and then all of a sudden like this girl is just ruining this guy's life. Like, just this guy's life is going down the toilet. And so eventually he has to go and tell his actual girlfriend about this whole affair, and because this guy's life is just blowing up, skyrocketing. Um, but yeah, so if anything, yeah, like I've seen a number of these kinds of obsession movies. Let me know about your favorite obsession film. Like maybe I'll just be like, oh yeah, I've heard of that one too, or maybe like, wait a minute, I don't remember that one. Um, because there's a lot of these kind of like fatal attractions or whichever that eventually will be a thing in our lives. Eventually, at some point in time, when eventually I'll have to review everything. I think that's where this kind of like ended up being one of those where it's like, hey, I'm just gonna have to eventually review everything at some point. I apologize if this review didn't have a heavy amount of details, but I went into this with fun. Like I went into this just going like, well, I hope that I don't have to just go through this entire film and go through every little tiny minute detail. Like it was kind of funny when we had Clint Eastwood who was to play on the radio station. It's not unusual, and but there wasn't any actual like lyrics. I'm like, so I guess for this movie, I guess they wanted to save on money and to just do the instrumental parts of songs instead of the actual lyrical songs. I guess that was just cheaper for movie's sake, which I thought was interesting. But anyways, I am going to get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.